Decoding Rumi's Masnavi by Pirjan. Story of the guest concerning whom the wife of the master of the house said, "The rain has set in, and our guest is left on our hands." The present poem from the 5th book of the Masnavi begins with an introduction full of significant points. In this story, the human body is likened to the house of Prophet Abraham, which was open to all human beings. In the introduction to this poem, a few verses from the Sultan Mahmud and his servant's dialogue are mentioned. The Sultan asks his servant for guidance so that he can benefit everyone, a guide understandable to human beings that may cure sadness. How the King Mahmud requested Ayaz for the second time, saying, "Explain thy case and solve the difficulty felt by the incredulous and censorious, for it is not like thy generosity to leave them in perplexity." This topic is beyond limit and measure. Now, O Ayaz, tell of thy states. Thy states are from the mine of novelty. How shouldest thou be satisfied with these vulgar states? Hark, tell the story of those goodly states. Dust be thrown upon the states, and the lessons of the 5 elements and the 6 directions. If the inward state is not to be told, yet I will tell thee the outward state in a word or two, namely, that by grace of the beloved the bitterness of death were made sweeter than sugar cane to the soul. If the dust from that sugar cane should enter the sea, all the bitterness of the sea would become sweet. Even so 100,000 states came hither and went back to the unseen, O trusted one. Each day's state is not like that of the day before. They are passing as a river that hath no obstacle in its course. Each day's joy is of a different kind. Each day's thoughts make a different impression. The following 3 bits, translated into most languages in the world, are one of the key ways to get rid of bitterness. All the subsequent stories are also interpretations of these 3 bits and the world of psychology and the inner journey. Comparison of the human body to a guest house and of the diverse thoughts to the diverse guests. The gnostic, acquiescing in those thoughts of sorrow or joy, resembles a hospitable person who treats strangers with kindness, like Khalil, for Khalil's door was always open to receive his guest with honor, infidel and true believer, and trusty and treacherous alike, and he would show a cheerful face to all his guests. This body, O youth, is a guest house. Every morning a new guest comes running into it. Beware, do not say, "This guest is a burden to me," for presently he will fly back into nonexistence. Whatsoever comes into thy heart from the invisible world is thy guest. Entertain it well. Rumi presents another story here, and then decodes it. Story of the guest concerning whom the wife of the master of the house said, "The rain has set in, and our guest is left on our hands." A guest came to a certain man at a late hour. He, the master of the house, made him at home like a collar on the neck. He brought trays of food and showed him every courtesy. On that night there was a feast in the parish. The man spoke secretly to his wife, saying, "Tonight, mistress, make 2 beds. Lay our bed towards the door, and lay a bed on the other side for the guest." The wife replied, "I will do service. I shall be glad to do it. To hear is to obey, O light of mine eyes." The wife laid both the beds and then went off to the circumcision feast and stayed there a long time. The worthy guest and her husband remained in the house. The host set before him a dessert of fruit and wine. Both the excellent men related to each other their good and bad experiences, and sat chatting till midnight. Afterwards the guest, being sleepy and tired of talking, went to the bed that was on the opposite side of the door. From shame, the husband did not tell him anything or say, "My dear friend, your bed is on this side. I have had the bed for you to sleep in laid over there, most noble sir." So the arrangement which he had made with his wife was altered, and the guest lay down on the other side of the room. During the night it began to rain violently in that place, and continued so long that they were astonished at the thickness of the clouds. When the wife came home, she thought her husband was sleeping towards the door, and the uncle on the other side. The wife immediately undressed and went to bed, and kissed the guest fondly several times. "O worthy man," she said, "I was afraid of this, and now that very thing has happened. That very thing has happened, that very thing. The mud and rain have stranded thy guest here. He is left on thy hands like government soap. How can he set out in this rain and mud? He will become a tax upon thy head and soul." The guest at once jumped and said, "O woman, leave off. I have boots. I don't mind the mud. I depart. May good be with you. May your spirit during its earthly journey never rejoice, even for a moment, so that it may the sooner go towards its native home. For this worldly pleasure waylays the traveler on his journey." When the distinguished guest started up and went off, the wife was sorry for having spoken with such unsympathetic words. Many a time the wife said to him, "Why, O Emir, if I made a merry jest, don't take offense." The wife's supplication and lament were of no avail. He departed and left them to grieve. Afterwards the husband and wife clad themselves in blue. They deemed his radiant form to be a candle without a basin. He was going on his way, and by that man's candle light the desert was isolated, like paradise, from the darkness of the night. The husband made his house a guest house in sorrow and shame for this calamitous event. In the hearts of them both, coming by the hidden way, the phantom of the guest was saying continually, "I am the friend of Qadir. I would have scattered 100 treasures of munificence over you, but 'twas not your appointed portion." The present story refers to the guest who symbolizes human thought. As we wake up in the morning, different thoughts come to our minds. House is also a symbol of our ability to accept. The couple symbolizes the human soul. Kissing is a sign of happiness in our minds for new thoughts and guests, and bitterness represents the discomfort of particular thoughts. The rain and the cloud are our lack of insight toward the guest, which causes us to misunderstand them. Of the things that the mind pays a lot of attention to is the image we have of ourselves. We define ourselves with images, and these images change regularly as new thoughts enter our minds. We have learned in life to keep happy thoughts and guests we love, and expel the sad thoughts. At the beginning of the story, Rumi likens the thought to a guest having boots, coming and going consciously. Rumi suggests not to argue with the mind, because such an argument causes the thought to like the house of the mind residing in it. Every thought that comes to our mind is like a guest leaving soon. If you keep the thought that makes you happy, you also won't have the thought that makes you sad. All thoughts should be viewed as guests, not lasting. It should be left open in the guest house so that all thoughts can exit and the fluctuations of sorrow and happiness never bother the human. We suppose that we will be fortunate if we keep our joyful and happy thoughts, but the thoughts that we think we are not happy with can have a positive result. Pain and sadness are parts of life, and accepting them allows us to keep our balance. Some traces of bitterness may bring us lots of blessings. In the present story, when the guest leaves the couple's house, they find out that they are missing a valuable gem. Staying some unpleasant thoughts sometimes polishes the human mind. Sometimes some things are not pleasing to us, while they may bring happiness to us later. We have to wait patiently and not make hasty judgments. All the positive and negative thoughts must be allowed to enter the mind and then exit. Both of these thoughts are useful for human beings. One should not run away from pain because it can cause a person to flourish. The guest intended to give the hosts a lot of treasure, but the hosts were unable to accept it. Mysticism has nothing to do with magic or talismans, but with the universe. The human cannot grow without the power of acceptance. Our thoughts, fears, and concerns must be accepted and admitted. Often unrealistic thoughts and fears cause our imbalances in life. Therefore, we must abandon all the bitter things, like the sweet ones, and not get caught by them. The war against thought has no winner. Yet, what about when real illness or death comes to us? When we do not observe ourselves consciously and never face every moment of the life, we are forced to live in a place called thought. We must know that when pleasure comes, there is a bitter shadow with it, hiding insidiously in order to paralyze our consciousness so that only pleasure can be seen. The sweetness of life has a bitter shadow, without seeing which we cannot live in the moment, for we are not sure about the time of our departure. When we do not see realities, we are confined to the thought structure. When we consciously enter into mysticism, according to Rumi, we die every moment, but we do not understand because life is confined to the thought system. Every moment the world is renewed, and we are unaware of its being renewed whilst it remains the same in appearance. Where there are merely logic and analysis, for instance the left hemisphere of the brain, we stay away from emotions and spirituality. Human prosperity requires both hemispheres, yet pleasure is always accompanied by shades of bitterness and sadness. If we consciously think about this truth, we will never again feel regret. Following is a decoding of the story by Rumi. Comparing the daily thoughts that come into the heart with the new guests who, from the beginning of the day, alight in the house and behave with arrogance and ill temper towards the master of the house, and concerning the merit of treating the guest with kindness and of suffering his errors patiently. Every day, too, at every moment a different thought comes, like an honored guest, into thy bosom. O dear soul, regard thought as a person, since every person derives his worth from thought and spirit. If the thought of sorrow is waylaying joy, it is making preparations for joy. It violently sweeps thy house clear of all else, in order that new joy from the source of good may enter in. When one realizes that they are getting old, they regret their youth, but the thought of sadness can lead to human ability and happiness. The sadness may set the scene for them. It scatters the yellow leaves from the bow of the heart, in order that insensate green leaves may grow. It uproots the old joy, in order that new delight may march in from the beyond. Sorrow pulls up the crooked rotten root, in order that it may disclose the root that is veiled from sight. Whatsoever things sorrow may cause to be shed from the heart, or may take away from it, assuredly it will bring better in exchange, especially for him who knows that with certainty that sorrow is the servant of the possessors of certainty. Unless the clouds and the lightning shows a frowning aspect, the vines will be burnt by the smiles of the sun. Good and ill fortune become guests in thy heart. Like the star, they go from house to house. At the time when it is residing in thy mansion, adapt thyself to it, and be agreeable like its ascendant, so that when it rejoins the moon, it may speak gratefully of thee to the Lord of the heart. Job, the prophet who was patient and well pleased with God, showed some sweetness to God's guest during 7 years spent in tribulation, to the end that when the stern-visaged tribulation should turn back, it may give thanks to him in God's presence in 100 fashions, saying, "From love of thee, Job never for one moment looked sourly on me, the killer of that which is loved." From his loyalty and his shame before God's knowledge, he was like milk and honey in his behavior towards tribulation. The thought of sorrow comes into thy breast anew. Go to meet it with smiles and laughter, saying, "O my Creator, preserve me from its evil. Do not deprive me. Let me partake of its good. O my Lord, prompt me to give thanks for that which I see. Do not let me feel any subsequent regret, if it shall pass away. Pay watchful regard to the sour-looking thought. Deem that sour one to be sweet as sugar." If the cloud apparently has a sour face, the cloud is the bringer on of the rose garden and the destroyer of the nitrous soil. Know that the thought of sorrow is like the cloud. Do not look so sourly on the sour. It may be that the pearl is in its hand. Endeavor that it may depart from thee well pleased. And if the pearl not be in his hand, and it be not rich, thou wilt increase thy sweet habit. Thy habit will profit thee on another occasion. Some day thy need will suddenly be fulfilled. The thought that hinders thee from joy comes by the command and wise purpose of the Maker. O youth, do not call it worthless. It may be a happy star and endowed with imperial fortune. Do not say it is a branch. Take it to be a root, in order that thou mayst always be master of thy object of desire. For if thou take it to be merely a branch and pernicious, thine eye will be waiting to see the root. Waiting to see is poison to spiritual perception. By that method thou wilt remain perpetually in death. Recognize it as the root, clasp it to thy bosom, and be forever delivered from the death of waiting to see. In mysticism, one's movement and thoughts lie in the body from one hand, and in the universe from the other. Much of the energy comes from the universe, and the major place where it changes its course is the thought. The thought labels it, ignoring the source of that energy because one may think a certain thought is nonsense. Every fall has a rise after it, but thoughts cause us to despair from rising. We must allow energies to work by removing obstacles. When we talk about contraction and expansion in mysticism, we become associated with intuition. Sometimes some spiritual abilities flow in us, and we become so engrossed in spirituality that our hearts shine, while some other times we have no desire at all, and our intuition disappears. In mysticism, both expansion and contraction are useful for humans. Neither of them is sustainable, and the mystic must know that it is not human or the thought that determines everything. Patience is one of the signs of the human spirit, and desire is a definite indicator of thought. The mystic must be able to admit to conditions. It is not up to the human to determine the expansion or contraction come. What lies in our hidden existence derives from being. It is from the pains that prosperity comes. If life were monotonous, and there was no pain and happiness together, life would be different. The power of acceptance activates consciousness and deactivates the thought. One should not judge emotions and conditions through thoughts and label them. You just have to think about being and move in the right direction. We should not change everything as we wish. The foundation of survival is the universe and the fountain of existence. We have to make a change in life so that if we cannot do anything, we can take advantage of the moments. We can enjoy our lives if we leave the doors open for our thoughts to leave.